After failing to topple the Liberal government, Conservatives are now asking what happened. Today, some Tory MPs are in Ottawa discussing the path forward. So why did the party ultimately lose the election despite winning the popular vote, and what is their plan now? Mark Strahl is a re-elected BC Conservative MP. He's also the opposition whip, and he joins us now in studio. Hi, Mr. Strahl. Nice to see you.
Good to be here.
Thank you very much for making time for us. I really appreciate it. I know it's only been a week, but from the time you've had to reflect on it, why do you think your party ultimately lost this election?
Well, obviously, while we did gain seats in large parts of the country, we got back seats in Atlantic Canada. We even gained seats in Ontario and across the prairies. British Columbia, my home province, we gained 8 seats. So we were quite happy with that result. But obviously, in some of the urban centres, the 905, 416, we didn't have the breakthrough that we were hoping for. And so when those vote-heavy areas go one way, that tends to determine the government, and that's what happened in this case.
Is there a post-mortem going on? I just want to be clear, because there's lots of different reporting. Are a lot of MPs, Conservative MPs here right now, what sort of process is the party undergoing to figure out what exactly went wrong?
So we had these meetings scheduled in advance. This was the leadership team that met with Andrew Scheer every morning that the House sat. So we had our House leader, our deputy leader, our deputy House leader, deputy whip, and myself, and some others in the room today, just members of Parliament, talking about, we have a caucus coming up in a week, so we have to do some planning for that. And then we did have a discussion about the election, what went well, what we need to do better on. But we're focused now on holding this government to account and replacing Justin Trudeau in the very near future.
When you are drilling down into what went wrong, and specifically in the more urban areas, as you point out, in the 905 where a breakthrough would have been required, what is your gut telling you about what the party failed to do?
Well, I think that is something that you need to take more than a week to figure out. I think that we are going to have serious people that weren't connected to the campaign conducting those sorts of reviews. We want to have good information, good data on that before rushing to any judgment. But anytime you don't win, you have to reflect on what went well and certainly why you didn't win. So those discussions are ongoing and certainly won't be, those conclusions won't be arrived at in a week. But we are very open to having those discussions. We need to be honest with ourselves about what went wrong, and we need to take the time to get that right. So that is where we're at right now. Is just in the review stage. There's no conclusions being jumped to at this point. We're just talking about our observations and moving forward from there.
There are other people weighing in on perhaps what might have gone wrong. I think, for example, Patrick Brown, who we have later on the show, wrote an op-ed talking about what he perceived as a lack of a serious climate policy. And I know that Conservatives today are kind of dismissing him because there's a lot of other stuff that he's involved in. But it's not just him. I had Premier Blaine Higgs, who's a big supporter of Andrew Scheer, on the show last week, and he also said that he felt like the climate policy that your party put forward ended up hurting you in his province. Is there some merit to that argument? Are you going to re-examine the opposition, for example, to the carbon tax?
Again, when you don't win, I think that you have to put everything on the table. You have to have those serious discussions. And if you take items off the table right away and say, well, we'll look at everything, but we won't look at that, I think you do yourself a disservice. So I personally, that was a very popular policy, even in British Columbia, where we have a provincial carbon tax. When the leader was out speaking to people, it got one of the biggest cheers in the room. So there's those discussions need to take place, and I think we can't rule anything out. We have to look at our platform, and we have to do so in a comprehensive way. And so what we're doing today was more of a scheduled meeting that was looking ahead to our caucus next week. But I think Conservatives across the country are having those kinds of discussions, and I think that's healthy. That's what our party has always done. Whenever we haven't formed government, we've always had a serious discussion. It reminds me of when Team Canada doesn't win a gold medal. That's what you fight for. You fight to win government, and when that doesn't happen, you always need to reflect to see what you can do better next time around.
So from your perspective, you would be open to a discussion about amending your party's climate policy, or even breaking away from that vehement opposition to a carbon tax?
Well, our party, the members drive our policy and platform and declarations. Those happen at our conventions, and our party has been very clear to date that we do not believe that a carbon tax is a serious environmental plan. The carbon tax is falling short of meeting the Paris targets. We put forward an alternative plan. Again, you talk to candidates across the country, you'll get different perspectives on how that platform sold. In my area, people were very open to a platform, an environment platform that looked at taking the fight against climate change global, for instance, cleaning up our land, air, and water, clean innovation, not taxes. That was a very popular item in my area.
But 2/3 of the country ended up voting for a party that, I take your point, but 2/3
Sure.
voting for a party that does support one, right?
Well, and you can say that about any number of policies at any time. So whether or not that was a driver of votes, I think that's part of the review, is saying what did drive people to our party. We got 600,000 more people voted for our party this time. 1 million less people voted for Justin Trudeau this time. So what drove those people, and what prevented us from getting to that next level that we needed to get to?
Yeah, and I was
going to
say, and I keep hearing Mr. Scheer, for example, drill down on the part of the argument that you're putting forward that is all about like the extra votes that you got, the fact that you won the popular vote, but ultimately, you know, the message that you were conveying during the campaign was not that you were running for a second place, just a bigger second place.
No, absolutely not. We ran to win. That didn't happen, and so we need to look at our entire operation, the entire campaign, including the platform.
Does that include the leadership?
I think the leadership, there's an automatic review that happens. Caucus is behind our leader. That's I've been talking to caucus members since last Monday, and they are disappointed we didn't win, but they know that for us to stay united, we need to focus on replacing Justin Trudeau. 4 years ago, if you would have said we'd be in this position, we would have taken it, but 2 months ago, we wanted to do better. So, and I think we need to be honest about that. For me, we can learn those lessons. Our leader can learn those lessons and take us forward and beat Justin Trudeau in the next campaign.
Do you think there's any sort of do you have any questions about Mr. Scheer's leadership itself? And I hear you saying that, you know, unity is something important, but I'm thinking, for example, of the questions and the answers that he recently gave about attending a pride parade. The idea that your party needs, in order to get beyond that 34% of the popular vote and head into majority territory, to be able to grow the base, grow the number of people who are willing and able to vote for you. Is Mr. Scheer capable of doing that from your position, from where you sit, from your perspective, or does he need to revisit some of his positions? I
think absolutely he can do it. I firmly believe that he will be Prime Minister after the next election, and that with a united Conservative team, we're going to help him do that. He's the most critical of his own performance of anyone. He looks at, it's like, again, I go to a hockey analogy where you say, if we didn't win, you know, the coach has to examine what they did right and what they did wrong, and so does everyone who was involved in it. So he's not put himself above reflection and above examination. We have a leadership review that takes place automatically in April. He has said he welcomes that. I think he'll win that, and because Conservatives understand that we need to focus on replacing Justin Trudeau, and we do that by focusing on him, keeping our eyes on the prize, and we don't know when the next election will be. It could be 6 months, it could be 2 years, whenever. We have to be ready, and I think the way that we do that is to learn lessons, get better, and focus on the path forward.
Do you think, though, some of the positions that he holds, and I am not here to argue that people can't hold their own beliefs, of course, but some of the positions that he holds will prevent your party from ultimately growing the number of people who are willing to vote for you?
Well, and again, I think that's part of this review process. I think that is a convenient narrative that some people have come to, that, you know, it's a result of certain policy positions, if you want to look at that, or personal positions. I think we have to actually talk to people and find out why we didn't do as well as we wanted to in certain regions of the country, and we need to focus on those things going forward. We don't presuppose why people did or did not vote for us. I don't think that data is known, quite frankly, at this point. We're a week out. We're gathering that information. And I think, I think we want principled leaders, authentic leaders. I think that's what Andrew Scheer is. And I don't think you can simply point to one particular interview or one particular thing that happened that resulted in us not winning, and that's why. But
ultimately, you can point to the fact that you didn't win.
Absolutely, and that's why we're having this conversation. Even though I do find it interesting that even though we are the only party that gained seats, we're the only party that gained popular vote, and number of votes. We're the ones that are everyone's looking inward and saying, well, maybe you need a change at leadership. I haven't heard the same questions being raised about other leaders that lost seats and
even Mr. Singh, who lost a huge chunk of the popular vote.
Well, perhaps I haven't been watching closely enough, but I certainly think that when
everybody lost, right? I mean, ultimately, every party except for the Bloc lost some, and the difference. And I mean, the reason the questions, at least from my perspective, are being asked of the Conservatives right now is because the message was put forth early on in the campaign that you were going to win a majority, and then it was followed by the party that wins the most seats should form government, right? There was the expectation was set by your party, and hence there are questions now about the fact that didn't happen. Yep. I take your point about the popular vote increasing, the seats growing, but you still didn't win.
Well, we didn't win. We did win more seats, and we did, as you say, but we are not under any illusion. No one is saying that went well, and there's no problems. There were things that did go well. There were, obviously we have 40 new members, 25 more seats than we did when we left here. So that isn't, that's not what our goal was, however. Our goal was to replace Justin Trudeau, and when that doesn't happen, as I say, we need to get into the data. We need to have an honest conversation with ourselves, and I think that process has begun. It's not finished yet. That's going to take some time, and I think we need to have serious people who weren't connected to it in any way have that review.
Has that formally started? Like, is there people that have been contracted to do it?
That is something that is going to happen. The details are not known yet, but that sort of comprehensive review happens every time we don't win. We didn't win, but we're going to win next time.
Okay, well, I appreciate you taking some time for us today, Mr. Strahl. Thank you so much. That's BC MP Mark Strahl. After failing to topple the Liberal government, Conservatives are now asking what happened. Today, some Tory MPs are in Ottawa discussing the next steps. You heard Mark Strahl there. Andrew Scheer is vowing to stay on as leader. Mr. Strahl says Mr. Scheer has his support. In an op-ed today, though, former Conservative MP Patrick Brown weighed in. So what does he think the path forward is? Patrick Brown is the mayor of Brampton, the former leader of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party, and a former Conservative MP. He joins us via Skype from his office in Brampton. Hi, Mayor Brown. Nice to see you again. Thanks for making time for us.
My pleasure to be on the show.
You wrote in your op-ed that the federal Conservatives need a, quote, Bill Davis-style leader if they ever want to defeat the Liberals. What did you mean by that?
Well, I thought Bill Davis was an example of a true progressive conservative. And I think the modern conservative movement has strayed from, frankly, some issues that I believe have disconnected them from many Canadians. You look at where the Conservative Party lost, it was communities like mine in the 905. And in my op-ed, I talked a lot about some of those issues, on issues of the importance of the environment, on equity. I think it would serve them well if they took the advice and the guidance and look at the example of the former great progressive conservative premier.
Let me boil those two issues down, because you talk about equity and you also talk about the environment. Let me ask you specifically, when it comes to the environment, do you think the federal Conservatives need to support a carbon tax?
I believe Canadians expect a credible plan on the environment, and to refuse to put a price on pollution, frankly, I think is out of sync with the times. I think Canadians take the environment seriously. It was Bill Davis who created the Ministry of the Environment. It was Brian Mulroney that negotiated the Acid Rain Treaty. And the notion that we want to put our heads in the sand when it comes to climate change isn't good enough, I believe, for Canadians. You can't say you believe in climate change, believe it's a threat, and not be willing to do something about it. And right now, the best tool to do something about it, the best tool we have at our disposal, is putting a price on carbon, putting a price on pollution.
Let me put to you, though, what their argument, the federal Conservatives' argument, was during this campaign, and that is they agree with you up until the point when you say the best tool to deal with it is the carbon tax. Their contention is that a different set of tools can still allow them to fight the effects of climate change. Why is that argument not salient for you?
Well, obviously, that argument didn't work with Canadians. And as you look at the results of the election, and I think it's important to have that honest assessment after an election is to ask yourselves what went wrong in urban Canada, what went wrong in the 905, and I think the fact, I don't think it's any surprise, but the party was criticized heavily for their plans on the environment. And listen, they had some good initiatives, the lake cleanup funds, there were some great environmental initiatives, but I just believe climate change is one of the real issues of our time, and refusing to have a discussion about the real challenges with emissions, I believe is a real problem in the modern conservative movement. But let me say also, there are those within the party, who have been champions for this. I look at Michael Chong. You look at the right-wing government in British Columbia, the Liberal Party, when they were in power there. You look at Jean Charest, a former conservative leader. I do believe there are voices in the Conservative Party that believe we need to have a credible plan when it comes to climate change. I was just disappointed to see that in the last election, this was, in my opinion, a glaring omission from the platform.
So how do you rectify, or how do you navigate, if you are the federal party and you've got such a large base of support? And I take your point on the votes that they didn't win in Ontario, but you do have such a large base of support in Alberta and in Saskatchewan, both provinces which have premiers right now who are championing for the removal of the imposition of the federal carbon tax. If you're trying to maintain that base, how do you navigate that concept mixed with what you're proposing right now, or what you're saying right now?
Well, I think the election results speak for themselves. I think it's important to respect the wishes of the voters. And if you look at the parties that were in favor of doing something on climate change, you look at the parties that were in favor of putting a price on carbon, this is the vast majority of Canadians. And so that's why my advice in my op-ed was it's time for the party to do some soul searching. They don't necessarily need more votes in Alberta, and I'm sure if it may be popular to run another campaign against climate change, to run another campaign on not including the environment in terms of a significant aspect of the platform, but the party needs to grow in urban Canada. And I believe that economic development and environmental sustainability aren't inconsistent. I believe there's a message and a solution that can be found that will be a win in Alberta too. Let me say, let me give you an example. If that carbon pricing was associated with broad-based tax cuts from what was raised on carbon pricing, well, maybe that's a pitch that could work in Alberta. Now, I'm no longer involved in partisan politics, so it's not my job to come up with these policies. My focus is in Brampton, but my advice to the party is they need to do that deep dive. They need to think about what would be a policy on climate change that you could unite Conservatives and unite Canadians who care about the environment. I don't believe that's inconsistent. I don't believe it's inconsistent to say you can be a proud Conservative and care about the environment and want to do something on climate change.
Let me switch to the second part of the argument you make, and that's around equity. You write that no federal Conservative Party leader has marched in a pride parade. I think interim leader Rona Ambrose did, but
yes.
no federal Conservative Party. And you said this is shameful. Love is love is love. Mr. Scheer has said that he's not comfortable, or that he won't march in one, and he sort of doubled down on that, or said it again after the election. He also said that people can be socially conservative, though, and still win an election in this country. Do you disagree with that assertion?
I believe that people expect the Prime Minister to stand up for all Canadians. It doesn't matter who you love, where you're born, the color of your skin, what God you worship. And if you sort of pick events that you're not going to be associated with, what message does that send to Canadians? And yes, Rona Ambrose was there. I thought it was a beautiful example of being an inclusive Conservative leader when she was there. But I can tell you, I go to the Pride event every year, and people have asked me, they say, Patrick, you're a Conservative. Where's the federal party? Why are they not there? And frankly, I never had a good answer. And so I thought this was a failure of leadership. I think it's important to really remember the roots of the party. And the roots of the party is this was the party of John Diefenbaker that championed the Bills of Rights. We should be a party that's always fighting for freedom, always fighting for human rights. And I think when it comes to protecting the rights of the LGBTQ community, I think we haven't seen enough leadership from the party, and it's time to get on the right side of history.
Mr. Scheer says, though, that just because he's not, and I'm paraphrasing, but just because he's not going to walk in a pride parade doesn't mean that he won't stand up for the type of equity that you're talking about, that, you know, he won't reopen. There will not be bills that reopen this. Can it not be possible that Canadians could support somebody who holds a certain set of beliefs but promises and pledges to maintain or defend the kind of equity that you're talking about?
Listen, I'm sure there's any spin you can put on it. I just think it's pretty simple. Love is love is love. And my message to Conservatives is this. Conservatives say we want less government involved in people's businesses. Why do we want government involved in people's bedrooms? Why do we want government involved in people's personal lives? If someone's happy, just let them be happy and celebrate that. And so, you know, it's a great event. It celebrates the strides the community has made. But frankly, there's still work to do. There's still discrimination out there, and I think it's disappointing that you see every political party there, and we saw that this year in Montreal, in Toronto, in Vancouver, but didn't see the leader of the federal Conservative Party there. I hope Andrew Scheer changes his mind, and if he stays on as leader, that he's there, he's present, and he shows that different side of the Conservative Party.
Do you still consider yourself a federal Conservative?
Well, in municipal politics, you have to be non-partisan. You have to work with everyone. But
as an individual, I guess, apart from the office that you hold.
Exactly. So it's the first election I wasn't allowed to take a lawn sign. But you know, I've been a Conservative all my life. But I believe your responsibility in municipal governance is not to participate in partisan politics.
Do you think Mr. Scheer should stay on as leader?
Well, my advice to Andrew Scheer is to, you know, have a lot of reflection on the issues that maybe he's seen a disconnect with Canadians on. And if he's prepared to be that leader that can show he's willing to fight for all Canadians, regardless of who they love or what God they worship, then maybe he can evolve and become that leader. But the points I try to raise in the op-ed were the areas that I believe there was weaknesses in the party. And that's why I gave the example of Islamophobia as well. You know, I was disappointed. You know, I do a lot of work with the Muslim community in Brampton, and I couldn't explain why the Conservative Party would oppose a motion condemning hate against Muslim Canadians. We need to show we'll stand up for every Canadian, and that's why I pointed out areas that I think the party failed, because after an election, you need to fix those mistakes. Before I let you go, there are a lot of Conservatives responding to your op-ed today, and a number of them are saying this is sour grapes. What's your response to that? Listen, I'm happy in Brampton. So listen, if people don't want to take good advice, then that's their own loss. So if the party doesn't evolve, if the party doesn't reflect Canada in 2019, the only people that are going to be happy with that will be the Liberal Party. You know, I'm sure Justin Trudeau would love a Conservative Party that doesn't evolve. I'm sure he would love that because it'll make his next election even easier. I really believe that there are elements within the Conservative Party, quietly, that would love to see the Conservative movement evolve with some of these issues. And I hope those voices become stronger. After a losing election, I think it's a great opportunity to have that honest discussion, that honest conversation. And frankly, it's not just myself, you know, giving this advice. I've seen a lot of commentary in the media of Conservatives saying, yes, we want our leader to attend Pride. Yes, we want to have more of a real plan on the environment. And so I think we're going to see more of that in the days and months ahead. Okay, I'll leave it there, Mayor. Thanks very much for making time for us today. Really appreciate it. That's Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown.
I think that we are going to have serious people that weren't connected to the campaign conducting those sorts of reviews. We want to have good information, good data on that before rushing to any judgment. But anytime you don't win, you have to reflect on what went well and certainly why you didn't win. So those discussions are ongoing and certainly won't be, those conclusions won't be arrived at in a week. But we are very open to having those discussions. We need to be honest with ourselves about what went wrong, and we need to take the time to get that right. Conservative Party Whip Mark Strahl from earlier on the show there. Some top Tories are in Ottawa today ahead of caucus next week. That comes in the wake of grumblings about the election loss for the Conservatives and questions about Andrew Scheer's leadership. What will come of this week's meeting and how should the party move ahead while remaining in opposition? Time for the Power Panel. In Calgary, Maclean's Jason Markisoff. Tim Murphy of McMill Advantage joins us from Toronto. And here with me in studio, former Director of Policy to Stephen Harper, Rachel Curran, now with Harper and Associates, and next to her, political commentator and former NDP MP Françoise Boivin. Hi, everybody. Hi. Nice to see you. Rachel, I'll start with
with you, as circumstances dictate. I was telling you right before that the interview with Mark Strahl I found pretty interesting because a number of things I heard from him I had yet to hear from Mr. Scheer, particularly that clip that we just played there. Yeah. He also mentioned that the people who will be conducting that kind of review won't be from within, that it'll be someone from outside. Do you think that kind of review is necessary, and what should it be looking at from your perspective?
Yeah, of course, it's absolutely necessary. Everything should be looked at. Mark has exactly the right message on that front. The Conservatives really need to look at the campaign that they ran and figure out what went right and what went wrong, and more importantly, figure out how they're going to improve for next time. So that's exactly the right message. Whether this is the time at which that will occur, I'm not completely convinced of that yet. It's a bit early. I think probably what they're doing now, Andrew Scheer has gathered all of the people who are closest to him around him. I think they are figuring out how he's going to survive for the next 4 or 5 months, because he's got a tough task on that front on his hands. And they're also figuring out how they're going to hold a Liberal government to account in a minority parliament and how to manage the logistics of that. Which are going to be important, and they're also going to be very complicated. So I think that's probably the tenor of the discussion right now. This is likely not the real postmortem on the campaign.
Let me quickly follow up with that. Do you think Mr. Scheer should hold on to that leadership?
Look, I think so I've got my own opinion as a party member. I think, though, that should be a decision for party members. A leadership review is automatic, so he's going to face that vote in April.
So you don't want to say what you're really thinking?
Well, I may not have decided.
Okay,
well, look, no, I am one member of the Conservative Party. There are thousands of others. They should all have a say in who the next leader is or whether Andrew Scheer keeps the job. And whether they think he can win the next election, because I think that is the priority for Conservatives, is replacing Justin Trudeau at some point. So
let me rephrase that. Do you think he can beat the Liberals?
Do I think he can beat Justin Trudeau? Well, I think he's got some challenges on that front. I will put it that way. Okay. So I think those challenges are what need to be discussed, and party members and party caucus need to figure out whether those can be overcome.
That's okay. I won't pull anymore. Françoise, what do you think? And your party has some history with, we had Matt Dubé on yesterday, who was kind of critical of the idea of one and done and thought it was, he didn't want to really revisit Mulcair, but was insinuating that he thought it was a mistake, didn't think that should happen this time. What do you think about the Conservatives?
Well, actually, I find it's pretty much the same situation as Mulcair faced in 2015. He had one mandate only, in my opinion, which was to bring the party to power. Remember that it was the official opposition. So they were vying for becoming the next government to unseat Stephen Harper, which is exactly the same thing that Andrew Scheer had faced this campaign. And a lot of people still can't get how he could lose that election with so many strong elements to beat Justin Trudeau. So on that perspective, he failed. So logically, my conclusion is pretty simple, maybe too simple, but when you fail at this, you should do the right thing the night of the result and leave the party, its caucus and its membership decide how they will perform better the next time. There's two
Let me interrupt for a second, though, because the argument he put forth at the time and continues to is that we lost, but we increased our share of the popular vote, which they did, and they picked up a number of seats, which they did.
Yeah, but for me, that's kind of, it's spinning. It's trying to bring something positive in something that is so negative, because like I say, there was a plate full of good reason to get rid of Justin Trudeau, and he couldn't manage it with the way he campaigned, and it's not as if the Conservative Party is a build-up party like the Green Party or Maxime Bernier's party or even the NDP. The only time they were close to power was that time in between 2011 and 2015. They're back to the restructuring, reconstructing. So we tend to be a bit more lenient with leaders because they have a long road ahead of them. Nobody thinks that the NDP will become the government the next campaign unless some type of.
Well, Jagmeet Singh
Well,
might
they
disagree.
are.
But
I know he wasn't. If they were in
realistic.
official, well, they were in official opposition. They're now in 4th place. So where are the calls for Jagmeet Singh's head? I wonder.
And that's what Mark Straw
Because,
was
like
saying
I say,
too.
they have to reconstruct. That's different. When you're
That's
objective,
what I
you
wanna ask
ask Rachel the best question. Do you think Andrew Scheer can beat Justin Trudeau at the next election? And honestly, I don't know how somebody can answer yes to that question. I like the guy, and yes, there's some positive, but
I want to bring Tim in, and let me ask you to make the comparison then, because like Rachel brought up, that's what Mark Strahl said too. Why are there not essentially as many questions about Jagmeet Singh's leadership as there are about Andrew Scheer's, given Jagmeet Singh actually lost a portion of the popular vote that the party held and lost seats?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's absolutely a fair question to ask about him. I think, he had, parts of the western wing of that party very upset with the way he managed the leadership while being leader, and obviously lost the foothold in Quebec they had and lost a significant number of seats. I mean, it's always a game of how you achieve versus the expectations. And going into the campaign, Jagmeet Singh's expectations were very low. He didn't exceed them, but he wasn't worse than the bad expectations he had, where I think there was somewhat a higher level of expectation for Andrew Scheer. Let me be clear, you've asked the other two their view, so I'm going to tell you mine, which is I'm hopeful.
I feel like I can guess it, but okay.
I am hopeful for a hard-fought, vigorous, divisive leadership race that Andrew Scheer wins.
Oh, you're suggesting.
But for me, the interesting thing about this kind of top Tories in town and reviewing, kind of what went wrong and what went right, to Rachel's point, I think actually there's two narratives going on at the same time, right? One of them is, yes, unquestionably all campaigns should have a review of what went right and what went wrong, but you're also doing that in the context of preserving the leader campaign, in which you don't want all the guns to point on the leader as the reason you lost. Often what's interesting to me is that if that's not going to happen, then you have to blame kind of the key advisor. And it was interesting to me that Hamish Marshall came out, as far as I know, without approval of anybody, to kind of frame how he thought he lost it over the last weekend, to try and get out ahead of it, which I think is not that loyal a move by him, frankly.
Jason, what do you think? And particularly, I think maybe all these questions around leadership, but within the context of that we're not in a majority situation, right? We're in a minority. There will be certain demands on all the parties and questions surrounding their survival in a sort of tenuous way, right? Like the support of each party is important in a minority situation.
Well, and there's an awareness that in a minority situation, you have to always be ready to take down the government and go to an election in case there's something disastrous, especially with perhaps questions still to come out about Justin Trudeau and Nancy Lavalin if the Justice Committee in a minority setting goes after him. So that's going to weigh on Conservatives certainly too. Do we want, if they do turf their leader, if Andrew Scheer leaves either in April or beforehand, that sort of gives this government at least another year or so of life while the main opposition party figures out who's going to take on him in the next election. I got to imagine that one of the key priorities and issues for the MPs and other Conservative Hubas meeting this week is, how do we figure out a way to get the public and party members and the media to stop talking about the leadership issue for the next several months. I mean, if we're having weekly power panels talking about this in December and January and March through at April, that's going to really make the Conservatives sweat, and they may decide that if there's so much pressure on him, and maybe it's not worth it.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.